Hi, I'm Justin Moorman.
And I'm Katie Thornton, and this is the Re-Education of Schools podcast,
where we have open, honest conversations about how to better understand social-emotional learning, trauma-informed care, the whys behind student behavior, and how to help kids navigate it all as they go through school and life. All right, welcome back to our next episode, Creatures of Habit, starting the school year intentionally. But hey, as we get started, if you have enjoyed listening to this podcast, we always appreciate it if you give us a 5-star review, whatever platform you listen to podcasts on. It always helps with other people finding the content and just helps us keep the conversation going.
Yep.
So Creatures of Habit, starting the school year intentionally. I'm glad I could read that. It was written hastily right before we started.
Yeah, the title.
And my handwriting, not a strength of mine.
Yeah.
No, we wanted to be able to talk a little bit about kind of creating some habits, how to set ourselves up for success as we start the school year, things like that.
Yeah, I think awesome part about education is that it's a natural reset every year. So even if you had a hard year or you ran things a certain way, I think any veteran educator would tell you that no year is the same, that the way you structure your classroom, you set up, the way you approach kids, these are all like staff dynamics, new team members, all those things. You can't duplicate the same year ever. So here's some ways that if you're like, man, that was a rough year, or I really want to approach things maybe more in a trauma-informed, restorative approach, here are some habits we're going to suggest to start to move intentionally throughout the school year that you can start building to maybe make a big shift or difference in your school year.
Yeah, that'll be good. All right, so what are some habits that we can establish to be intentional? Start off our school year.
Oh, I got a good list. You ready?
I figured you did. That's why I was asking you.
All right, here we go. First one, I started doing this in January, and it really was mental health-wise a big game changer for me. Leave work at work. Stop taking your computer home.
That's a good one.
When you leave work, you're done working, and then your real life starts. And you need to be present for that, so you need to be able to clock in, clock out, like have some work-life balance. In all honesty, that is like my number one biggest thing I will promote.
Yeah,
I had a really hard time about that for my first 15 years of working. So
till just now.
Yeah, so
just now is when I started.
But yeah, seriously, in January, it took 8 or 17 and a half years to figure that out. But I've left the computer at home now, or at work. So another thing to think about is eat lunch in a lounge. Schools intentionally have really nice teachers' lounge. If you've not redone your teachers' lounge, maybe that's a fun project to take on this year to make it a warm and inviting place. But I think people avoid that a lot. And I think we just had a previous episode talking about stress and how important it is to be around people.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's not the lounge, maybe a group of teachers you eat in a classroom with every day, take 15 minutes to sit down, eat your food, and talk to people. That is a habit you should really it's good for regulation. It's good for camaraderie. It's good for collaboration. Those little micro interactions build stronger relationships. Be intentional. Try to eat your lunch with other humans. Greet each student by name. That comes up time and time again if you look at Tier 1 best practices. Each morning, start the routine or the habit that when students walk into your classroom, you have some routine where you greet each and every one of them as they walk in their classroom. Hi, Johnny, good morning. I'm so glad you're here today. For every student that walks into your door, or class period, whatever if you're high school.
Yeah, sure.
Greet each student by name. Make that a habit. Honor and support staff that are specialists as your classroom as equals. Make them feel part of your classroom or your team. So as a gen ed teacher, or when I was a special ed teacher, because I always worked in a unit-based program, how can you be intentional to even change your language when you're talking to kids or families? These are the teachers in the classroom. I stopped calling my classroom as a gen ed teacher and as a special ed teacher when I ran a unit. I never called it Mrs. Thornton's room or Mrs. Thornton's class. I always said room, whatever our room number was. Because I felt like when I labeled it my classroom, then I was in charge and I was taking ownership of it. That really, there was lots of adults that worked in there that made that room happen, both for gen ed and special ed, that I stopped calling it that. So just think about just even some verbiage or mindsets when you address how you address the other staff in the classroom or how you present them in your classroom. Those are good habits to I always signed everything from everybody in the room. Just really made it a really united team effort. So think about making some shifts there, giving those teachers or the other specialists in there some space to work out of the room, that we all kind of have this community feel. And I think that's a good habit to start making. Communicate often, communicate well, and communicate when it's necessary. So think about if communication isn't your strong suit, how are you communicating with families or other staff members to make that intentional this year. Provide positive feedback to each other, to kids, to families, and just not only when things are tough.
Yeah,
So if you're
for
one that
sure.
communicates only, well, hey, we're 9 weeks in, this has been really tough. Maybe be intentional, be like, week 3, having any issues with this kid, but I'm going to email his parent to say he's had a great start to the school year. That relational currency will pay off 100 times when you do have to make the hard phone call.
Especially if you know, okay, if you know, like, you have a student that's going to be in one of your classes or that's moving up to your class from a previous grade or something like that, and you're aware, building wise, like the student
Yeah.
maybe has a tough time, like really be intentional about that. If there's a kid coming up in your class that's everybody wishes was in their class, I mean, yeah, it's great to send stuff home, but like it's probably a little bit less important to do that like super intentionally and super early.
Yeah. And if you're
You know?
working with other teachers and maybe it was kind of a tough day for a student, but the teacher handled it really well on either end, be intentional. Hey, good job today goes really far with people. And you don't
Yeah.
think it's important, but it really does fill up a bucket when someone feels acknowledged. Be part of the solution, not just the complaining. So if you're one that always thinks, well, if they would just, or why don't we just have this, or why don't we start this, or you know what they should do. If you're one of those people with great ideas, but you don't implement any of them, maybe think about how you're adjusting some of that commentary because it just becomes a negative, toxic cycle. So if you want to see something to be implemented, ask how you can get that started. Maybe you're the one that's going to do it, So just think about that. Think each day, how can I make a person's day or life better? Maybe that's a habit you start thinking like, I'm going to make one person's day better than it was. Laugh. I think we talked about that this is our super fun job. And if you're not having fun, you get to play with kids and young adults every day and live in school forever. Enjoy having that as your professional career. What a cool job. So
Yeah, you get to hear some stuff or be a part of some stuff that's absolutely ridiculous sometimes. Like that you're like,
Yeah.
what did they just say? Or how did that just happen? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, have fun.
Yeah, it's a fun job. Super fun job. Have boundaries, saying no without having to give a big explanation. I feel like somebody told me when you hit 40, this was like a really freeing thing that you kind of really figure yourself out in 40s. I'm still figuring it out, but I would agree, like having to say no and I don't owe like a big, thesis about why I can't do something.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
no,
I'm just not doing it.
I'm just not doing it. I'm not interested. Thank you. I don't have time or space for that. Like not being overly people pleaser, putting that boundary up for your own stress. Start working ahead. So if you're always playing catch up, you're not doing your best. So start thinking about how can I think about what's happening the next month or a few weeks and start having things done ahead of time. Be real, authentic human to your students. Let them see you be upset, apologize, humble yourself, be real to your students. So if you're one that just always puts on the front that everything's fine, your kids learn a lot about how you manage and handle stress and adversity. So be real and honest about that with your students would be a great habit to start. Show gratitude, maybe a habit. We had somebody in our building that was absolutely just the most incredible human that did this all the time and what a difference it made. She had a habit of writing sincere, heartfelt, genuine, detailed notes to people about just something she really loved about them or way they've handled something. And it was such a gift. So if you have that kind of gift or heart for that, make that a habit that each month you're going to write a note of gratitude to somebody to show appreciation. Be prepared, but be flexible. So have a plan going into every day, but just know that you can be flexible with it. Maybe that's a habit. Some people feel like they have to check off everything, and that's the routine of their classroom. I have to get all this done by Friday. We talk about a lot, just having some habits of flexibility to roll things over. Put self-care on the calendar. I've had to do this, that if you're going to go to a workout class, you're going to do this, invite a friend to it, put it on your calendar, and make it a non-negotiable. Don't say, well, I'll move that, or I won't go today, so I can do this for you. Make your self-care, make that a habit that you're going to go do that class every Monday at 4, and that's just when you're going to do it. That other things are going to take priority, and you're not going to cancel it. My last one I have, which I had a lot, so allow time for restorative work. This is a human aspect. Make it a habit early, and it will pay off 100 times for your community to take care of its own self. So if you create habits in your classroom, we have problems that we meet, and we talk about it, and we support, and we forgive, and we model, we put plans in place. If you start that really heavily in the beginning of your classroom, that's like a habit or routine you have, your kids and staff will start to take care of themselves. You won't really have to manage it because they're managing each other and supporting each other. So really strong habits to have. So that's my exhaustive list of 20 things. What you got for
Yeah.
us?
Well, I don't have a list like that,
Yeah.
so I kind of went a different direction.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So one of the things I looked into a lot, and really just anything I say, you can almost assume that I'm stealing it from James Clear, who was the author of Atomic Habits.
Yes. Yep.
And he does a lot of work. If you ever visit his kind of website, there's a lot of links to articles, things like that. Super useful, super interesting guy.
Was like the bestseller last year or whatever. Like more people had read that book than any other book.
Yeah. And so he does a lot, but he also practices a lot of what he preaches, I guess, is how you would say that. But he does a lot of interesting things. So what I kind of did was pull from him on what maybe even making a habit looks like to some extent. So he talks about early in his book, and then in one of the articles I was reading that I think was just an excerpt from his book, was the 3 different levels where change can occur when you're creating a habit, right? So you can have outcomes, the outcome level, and this is to change your results. So like most goals and habits are in this area, like lose weight or write a book or increase test scores or receive an accomplished rating on my evaluation or have all my students pass the state test. It's a lofty goal, right? So you can have outcome kind of change. You can have processes kind of change. This is a change of your habits. So the first one's change of results. This is change of your habits. So maybe this is like implement a new gym routine, declutter your desk for a better workflow, have lesson plans created for 2 weeks out all the time, right? That would be like a very habit kind of process kind of change. And then the third level is an identity. So this is like a change in your actual beliefs or worldview or self-image. So this is kind of a direct quote. I'm just going to read this because I thought it was really good. So he says, outcomes are about what you get. Processes are about what you do. And identity, that third level, is about what you believe. When it comes to building habits that last, when it comes to building a system of 1% improvements, the problem is not that one level is better or worse than the other. So none of those levels are better or worse than the other. All levels of change are useful in their own way. The problem is the direction of the change, right? And this is also kind of a Simon Sinek idea too. He talks about this kind of idea a lot in a different way. So instead of starting with outcomes and then trying to move to processes and then finding out ultimately your identity, what he talks about is going the opposite direction. So what this could look like instead is like, I want to be the type of teacher that helps each student show academic growth. And then you ask yourself, okay, so what does a teacher like that look like? And then what does a teacher like that do?
Yeah.
What are processes that a teacher like that has? What are the outcomes that they're going to probably see? But you have to like decide what kind of person you want to be first, right? So it's kind of a super long answer. To say, I guess not as long as your answer was, though. So let's state that clearly. But I do think it's like a little bit of a longer answer to say, like, I think that you have to start out by figuring out what kind of teacher you want to be this year and then act like that kind of teacher. And so that I think that's going to be different for everybody. And at any given year, that can be different. Depending on like what kind of focus you want to have. But I think that's an important aspect. It's not just like come up with like the list of what you want to do, what the outcomes are you want to have, but decide who you want to be and what kind of teacher you want to be.
Yeah, I love how you broke that down because I was thinking like we've a couple
I love how James Clear breaks that down.
James Clear's in your interpretation via education. Because I was even thinking through like we have a couple really high performing teachers that consistently score extremely well on like state testing stuff.
Sure.
Like year after year for all their kids, so all the subpopulations. And I often talk to them and say like, how did you like? What's
what are you doing?
What's the magic? And I think what you're saying is their outcome is consistently super high, so they have like so much to offer other teachers, right? These are veteran teachers. But it's really understanding their process and their planning and how they go about delivering instruction. I have my theories of what they do, but I think really talking about through that process, and the process is the part they can coach through other teachers once they have the belief that they want to score like these other teachers do.
Yeah. Well, those people probably are really comfortable in who they are too. Like they know what kind of teacher they want to be.
Yeah.
And so then they do the things that help them be that kind of teacher. And I think that's important. And again, like any given year, it can be anything. It doesn't have to be even tied to, some kind of academic whatever with your students. I mean, it can be, I want to be the kind of teacher that, I don't know, is a really safe space for all of my students in
People feel
whatever way. And
comfortable
so
talking.
what does that look like? What kind of processes do I have to put in place? But I think it's interesting to, like, the direction matters. If you focus on the outcomes and that's where you start, you're going to have a much harder time actually getting the outcomes because you're working backwards ultimately.
Yeah, we just had a conversation with Joe Bremer and Margaret Thorsborn about just really it all goes back to your beliefs, right?
Yeah, sure.
So what do you believe? What do you want for your school? And I would challenge, if you have a school, if you're a veteran educator, it's no longer just about your classroom. It's about school culture and climate. So think about at that point, thinking about the accomplished rating, I guess even at our state rubric, like really being a leadership role, and how can you help influence and support that your belief system has influence on others, and action that you can take to help support your larger school culture and climate to make that for other kids. So yeah, I like it.
All right, talk about some of the science behind establishing new habits.
Yeah, this all goes back to looking up just like some general research and just what we know about neural pathways, right? That your brain is constantly looking for ways to save effort. And for it to do that, it will automatically go to time-saving instinct, which is your daily routines, right? You probably got dressed and had coffee and did whatever this morning that you do and didn't put a lot of thought into it. You were on autopilot. And the days that you have to put effort in because your routine is different, those are harder mornings because I'm out of routine, right?
Absolutely.
So your brain, this is a saving aspect that your brain does automatically. The habits and routines help your brain save effort and energy to do that. So let your brain kind of gear down in more relaxed environment. Habits are formed when we establish a new neural pathway. It's hard to create those new pathways. It takes intentional routine to make it happen. So consistency, 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 consistency. This is what we will see with change in behavior for ourselves. And when we talk about seeing change in behavior for our students, you have to have that consistent, predictable routines time after time. And that's when we see the fruits of our labor. People often will go back and say, well, I didn't see any changes. I've done this for 5 days. Sometimes those neural pathways for some of these kids, their brains are all over the place wired for things. To build those new neural pathways, it takes time, habits, routines. That's why it's hard.
Yeah. I was looking at this idea again of identity processes and outcomes. So after you kind of figure out your identity, the next thing you do is set yourself up for some what James Clear was talking about. It's like some small wins. So maybe your identity is being a teacher with like a healthy work-life balance this year. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's who you want to be. That's the kind of person you want to be this year, which I think is a worthwhile goal. Especially, I already don't remember which episode or if it was this. No, it was one of our previous episodes. Forget what I say really quickly when I say it. But teachers have a tendency to like overwork. Or work really, really hard and like do almost like too much, partly because you want to be prepared and there's nothing wrong with that. And, but I think you can lose yourself in that real quick because you can go too far one direction. So I think that's a worthwhile goal to have a healthy work-life balance, be the kind of teacher that has that. So maybe if that's what you decided to do this year, maybe a small win would be doing no work past 5 o'clock.
Yep.
You're saying I'm going to do that. Or maybe you're going to say I'm going to do no work on the weekends or on Wednesday evenings.
Yep.
And then like you call that, like that's the win. You're maybe still doing work after 5 o'clock on Monday and Tuesday, but like, hey, you know what? I'm not going to do it like on these certain, you set up something that's small, that's achievable, right? So I think one of the examples that he uses is, if you wanted to be healthier, you wanted to walk 10,000 steps a day, you start by, when I get home, I'm going to have like a pedometer and I'm going to walk 50 steps a day. And then the next day I'm going to walk 100 steps after I got home. And then the next day I'm going to add 50 more. And if you keep doing that, by the end of the year, you're doing 10,000 after you get home every day. It's just things like that. Small, like achievable goals. Don't just go all in right away. Be like the idea if you want to run a marathon, right? You don't go out the first day and be like, well, here I go. Like I'm going to run a marathon. Like you got to kind of baby step your way up to it and have those small wins so you don't get too frustrated and don't give up on it.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the process-oriented part of what you talked about. Think about if your goal is for that more work-life balance, then go back to your identity of why am I giving this assignment? What is the purpose of my work? Why am I grading this? I think we get into some really bad habits about grading everything.
Yeah.
I've always given this assignment. Think about your purpose or intent, and if it still serves its purpose, and what's the payoff or payout at the end for you and your kids really truly learning that standard.
Yeah.
So, and
Yeah.
maybe it's okay to be like, that wasn't maybe the best use of my time or the kids' time, or we're going to do this other process oriented thing that's going to be a larger rubric that's going to save me grading time, planning time, processing time, right?
Yeah. And like reevaluating too, because I think especially if you have been around for a while, you've got your stuff that you created, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've created this, like I know it, so now I can kind of like you were talking about with your routine of getting up in
Yeah.
the morning. Like there are some people that have been teaching long enough now, the same subject, the same, the same grade level, whatever it might be, that you pretty much can come in. You don't have to really create much of anything, and you can just do it again. And
Because that's your habit.
Yeah, and it's solid. No, nobody's saying it's wrong or bad, but it also takes you a certain amount of time to on the back end of grading things or finishing stuff up or whatever it might be. And so I think if you are willing to reevaluate the stuff you do, maybe you can take a look and you're like, oh, I can actually ditch some of the stuff that I was doing. Or I can do it and I don't have to grade it. Like we can still do it, but I don't have to sit and grade that essay from those kids. Maybe they do. Maybe they're
Peer grading.
Yeah, peer grading.
Yeah.
Thanks. I was going to say self-grading. That's less helpful, I guess. It's also helpful. But you're doing those kind of things. You're shifting in those kind of ways. You don't have to do it exactly the same way you've done it before, just because that's how you've always done it, and you've always gotten good results doing it that way.
Yeah.
You can change it up and see how does this work if I make it a little bit more reasonable for myself as a human. How does this work?
Yeah, lean into that.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so what are some setbacks in establishing new habits? So when we start habits, we can run into some roadblocks, some setbacks. How do you maintain them? How do you, or what are some things you might run into?
I think first of all, setting your goal, make your vision board, right? However you set goals for yourself, put it out in the universe.
Yeah,
maybe tell somebody else about a goal you have so you have some accountability.
Yeah, I think that's a good one.
I'm a firm believer you have to have a support system. So if you're wanting to do a new workout routine, you don't have somebody going with you, are you going to stick with the new habit if you don't have accountability? I know I wouldn't. So I think having accountability or people that are going to set forth the same goal for you and you can check it in each other, I think is incredibly important. Stick with it. What is your, think about the accountability piece. And then who will be checking in on you, or what's your check-in points, I guess, if you're having goals. And what is your core beliefs? I think this goes back to what you were saying about the atomic habits and those kind of things. But really, what is your core beliefs that took you down this path for change?
Yeah.
Have you been so stressed that it's having from your work life that it's having impacts on your marriage or the way you're parenting your children, right? Which are obviously the most important, that you now are like, I need to reflect on my work career so I do have some more balance, or that my doctor told me my test results are bad and I really have to lose weight or to eat this way, or think about what your reason why you're making changes and keep that anchoring back that there's some larger life implications of maybe I'm having kids, discipline issues in my class chronically, and I really want to switch it up and make it a more spending so much time on discipline, that maybe I can start really be intentional about a more of a restorative community so that my learning community looks different. Or just think about your intentionness of why that you came to this point where you're going to make this habit change, and then always remind yourself of that this is really the end goal, because the other way wasn't really effective for you in some capacity or not.
Yeah, you hear that all the time with habit creating and culture creating. It's always like, does this line up with like our vision statement? Like, does this line up to, but that's true for individuals, right? Why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Am I doing this just because I've always done it? Am I doing this because the teacher next door did it? Am I doing this because the person I did my student teaching with 9 years ago did it that way?
Yeah.
Like, why am I doing it? And does it still work? Or did it ever work? Or should I keep doing it? Like, ask yourself those questions. It's good to have self-reflection. And actually, at the start of a school year, near the start of a school year, is an easy time to do that, and kind of evaluate what kind of things you did maybe a previous year and what you're going to be doing coming up. But I'd also say, if you're listening to this in the middle of a school year, it's never too late to change stuff that's not working well for you for whatever reason. Like, be willing to pivot a little bit, even when it's hard, and even if it means it upsets the fabric of what you're doing for a little bit, it's still probably worth it to go ahead and make some of those changes. even if it's like kind of an awkward timing to do it.
Yeah, I tell this. I've done a lot of new teacher mentoring or student teacher mentoring right through my career, and I tell this to new teachers all the time or student teachers, like, you'll change the way your room looks, you'll change the routines you do, you'll change the habits. Like, keep doing that. Be responsive to your classroom environment. Don't get set in a way because you thought I saw this from somebody else and I thought I should be doing that. Good teachers are constantly changing, and then talk to the classroom environment about it, right?
Yeah.
We have really strong communities like, hey, tomorrow we're going to change this. Here's what I was thinking. This is going to be our new routine. Now, you don't want to do it all the time because that shows no consistency and predictability.
Yeah, if you're changing every 3 days, like, that's not helpful.
But I think good teachers change and implement different routines and systems, because what worked for last year's kids is not going to work for this year's kids, and you may find you need to structure or place things differently to make it work for this group of kids, and that's best teaching practices. So
yeah,
do
absolutely.
it. If it's November 1st, that's when you're changing, and that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's hard to find the consistency of a lot of the stuff you said. I had down as well, but I think that, again, when you face adversity, our brains all default to the path of least resistance, and so we're going to go back to old things that we've done that are maybe not best. Just really try to be aware. Again, have those people around you that do provide accountability, so that if you're looking for better work-life balance and somebody notices that every day when they leave your car is still there, like, they can say to you, hey, so I thought you were really shooting for, like, not working past this time, like, or you weren't going to work late on these days. Like, why are you still doing that? Like, you should really still do, like, have those people. So talk about that with people. I think that's good. Having visual reminders, it's always helpful to have something that's a visual reminder, Post-it notes, some kind of like little trinket that reminds you of what your identity is, who you want to be, this year. I think that's good. I think that's a helpful thing. I even thought, like, for some of this stuff, depending on age of kids, but I think really probably no matter what an easy beginning of the year kind of activity too, to go through with students. Like, hey, this is kind of who I want to be this year as a teacher. We're all going to take time to figure out who do you want to be this year as a student? Like, what is that? I mean, I think we all kind of do similar-ish stuff, but I think that's a way to have that kind of out there in the whole classroom environment as a whole, and could be helpful. And then I think the big thing and I talk about this a lot, but you got to start. Like, if you don't start with some kind of change, with some kind of habit forming change, you're never going to do it. Nothing's ever going to change. Right? Like, you have to actually begin. And so depending on what the thing is that you're trying to implement this year, who you're trying to be, what processes you're trying to create, start them, do them. A big thing I've heard from multiple different people in different ways, but is convince yourself that you're going to start it and do it for, maybe it's like a actual process that you do every day in class, morning meeting in some way. You're going to do some kind of closing end of the day thing. Like, start it, tell yourself, like, hey, I'm going to do it for at least 3 minutes. And if it's not working, I'm going to call it, or I'm going to do it for at least 3 weeks. And if it's not working, then it's okay for me to call it. Like, I don't have to keep doing it. Like, I can change, I can adjust. But if you don't ever start, because you're like, well, I don't know if it'll work. I don't know if it's going to go well. I don't exactly know what the outcome is going to be. Well, you're never going to start doing it. And so give yourself the permission to quit something if it's absolutely not working, but you only have that permission to do that if you've started it in the first place. Can't quit something you didn't start. So you got to actually start something, actually implement some changes, and see what happens from there. All right, so we're asked this often, where do you actually start to establish collective habits, not just individual?
Yeah, so we get asked this a lot of, like, hey, our school, I would like to change this about my school, or we really want the organization to do this, or I think this is probably most people email us, frequently asked questions. So how do you, and that's such a, big question to ask, right?
Yeah.
There's so many things. I was trying to email somebody the other day, and I was like, gosh, I mean, email's not going to suffice this, right? This is like probably a long philosophical conversation to have. But my biggest advice about collective habits, like, let's say we're changing discipline policies, or the way we're approaching kids, or we're changing some other habits that were in the building that we're actually thinking, you know what, neuroscience says that's actually not best practice for kids. We're going to change this. What I would encourage people to do is to be routine. Like, when you are consistent, that steadiness creates a sense of predictability, sense of safety, a sense of trust. within other people surrounding you. And once you have that, then you can start making some cultural changes. It's not perfect. Gosh, completely imperfect all the time. But change really happens when we can anchor back to like the research, data, and feedback. Those three things are always really critically important. So if you're looking at changing habits or systems within your collective building, you have to always anchor it back to research. Can't because I said so. It's not good enough.
Sure.
That here's data that we've had before, and there's a need for a change, that I'm not just changing because I feel like it. Here's why I'm making the change based on this research. And I've also had some feedback or input from some people before I actually decided that this was going to be a prioritized change for us. So those three things really need to be in play before you actually make new habits for your classroom. And then I keep on thinking about that slow and steady drip fills the bucket. Stay consistent, predictable, grounded to the beliefs and expectation, and it's always progress over perfection.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Yeah, I keep thinking like just like you, I mean, and you kind of touched on this, but I think just like individuals have can have their own identity and kind of goals for the year and whatever. I think buildings do that as well, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it's good to talk about those. Don't just go in and like let yourself be like whatever the routine always is. It's just the routine, and we just go through every year. That can be probably even easier to do, like a trap to fall into if you've got a lot of veteran staff that have been around for a long time at one building, is to just be like, well, everybody's just going to do their year and that's it. But like, I think it's good and important to talk about what are our collective goals this year? And sometimes the district kind of has some say in those kind of things and pushes that, you know, as a whole, the district's doing for a year. But I think it's good to even have own building spins on those and have like its own kind of identity that's created. And then that gives you something to anchor back to, right? You look back and you say, well, what does a building that does this? What does a building that's like this? What do they do? What are the things they put importance into? What are the things they put their time into? And I think that's a good place to start, is having those conversations again, not just as an individual, but probably as a team and as a whole group, as a whole staff, ultimately in some way, making sure that people are on the same page. And then I think, again, continue to encourage a culture where you can point out to one another, again, something that you touched on, when somebody is not following through on those greed habits, right? Or on those greed-like routines. And a good way to start that, I have found, is when you yourself are willing to share in your own struggles and following through on that, right? Like, man, I'm having a really hard time being... I don't know.
Doing restorative conversations.
Yeah, I'm really struggling with that.
I'm not debriefing with my team. We've handled it. We've managed. We've talked a little bit, but I've not had a good debrief plan.
Yeah, and saying like, I just don't know how to do it. It's a struggle, you know, for me right now. And doing that with the team that you work with, allowing people to like be in on that with you, like that also gives them permission sometimes to say something to you. It gives you permission to be like, hey, it seems like maybe you're in the same spot I was in earlier when you helped me out. How can I help you out with this kind of same thing if you're struggling with it right now? I just think it's an important thing to do, to have, again, good relationships that are open, honest, and to the best of our ability, be able to be honest with each other about those kind of things. I think is super helpful.
Yeah, I think one big culture and climate downer, I think for some buildings that I've seen fall out, is that we say we're going to do this year. We talked about at the beginning of the school year.
Everybody's excited.
Everybody's got energy at the beginning, and then there isn't really a consistent plan to follow through on. I've heard from other staff, right, that we talked about this at the beginning of the year, but then we never did anything else with it, right?
Yeah, there was no follow-up.
There's no energy. So think about, if you're really going to try to change habits, have the plan on the schedule, on the books of what your check-in points are already, and commit to those, whatever that looks like. So just, follow through on whatever that new initiative or new habit or new routine that you're going to have a consistent follow-up plan for that.
Yeah, you can't just expect to say it once and have it work, right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing we talk about with students all the time. Like, we can't just do it once and expect that it takes and works and becomes a habit in any way, shape, or form. So, no, I think that's all really good. Good stuff to think about as you get ready to start a year. Or, again, even if you're listening to this in the middle of a year, to think through, like, do I have stuff that I've created? Like, what am I basing my decisions off of right now? Am I just winging it every single day? Like, trying to, I mean, sure, I've got lesson plans and stuff, but am I being the person that I want to be to the students that come through every single period of my day? Like, am I being that person to, I think it's good stuff to think through.
And we talk a lot about behavior and SEL, obviously this premise of our podcast, but
Sure.
just even think about all the stuff coming out with science of reading and those habits
Mm-hmm.
that you're creating with those new reading systems. And there's the research and the data, right? And those, if you're not intentional, I think that's the whole science of reading. You have to do the OG or whatever you're doing every day. It's the consistency routine. That science is the same behavioral science.
Yeah.
So to create those things, the academic and the behavior science aren't any different.
Yeah.
Same research, different avenues
Yeah.
to present it.
For kids and for us,
Yes.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's both.
Yeah.
All right. So what would you want people to walk away from this episode knowing?
I wrote down that habits are hard. This work is hard. So 2 really hard things you're going up against, but think about what you want for yourself and what you want for your students. Prioritize that. Make that your priority for the year. Don't take on the world, but small shifts that are consistent will have a huge impact.
Yeah. I think it's good. I think for me, it was like that idea of decide who you want to be. That's really important. The whole identity thing. I think that's a big deal. Like, I feel like I've not intentionally decided a good number of years ago, like the kind of person that I wanted to be as a teacher, and like that drives me. Now I work in a very specific kind of role. I'm not in a general education classroom and have a real specific kind of job that's maybe not ridiculously common out there. And I say all of this understanding that that's the case, but like I really wanted to make sure I was somebody that was, a good safe place for kids to be able to be at, and that they could be who they were in that moment, and whoever they were being in that moment, and that was going to be okay. And that drives a lot of the decisions I make. And I think that one of the things it does is that it means that sometimes I make decisions that maybe other people wouldn't necessarily understand all the way, but I know the reasons why I'm making that decision.
Yep.
And I know the reasons why I'm being that person. And I know the things that sometimes I have to set aside and not put as much emphasis on to be that person that I know that I want to be and that I feel like I need to be. And so I think that's important. It really is an important thing. Is to really identify what kind of identity you want to have, because not only does it help drive what you do, but it helps you know that you're doing okay when tough moments come and when people maybe don't agree with you, because people may not agree with some of the stuff you do. And when they don't agree with you or have a problem with maybe how you're doing something or how you're not doing something or whatever it might be, like that's all you have to fall back on is like, okay, but who did I decide that I want to be, and why did I decide that? And well, by golly, that means that I'm going to maybe not be as great as this, or I'm not going to put as much emphasis on that. And I think just knowing that is a big deal. So I think I've learned to continue, to just continue to fall back on that. And so I really encourage people to think that through. Who do you want to be? What do you want your identity to be? What kind of teacher do you want to be? What kind of person do you want to be who happens to have a teaching job? I think all of those things are really important things to think through. So I'd encourage you to take time to think about that in your own life, and to figure out who you want to be this upcoming school year. Yeah.
Big task.
Yeah. It seems easy, but like when you really think about it, you're like, well, I do a lot of things, but what kind of teacher do I want to be?
Yeah.
So, well, as always, we're really excited that you guys are joining in the conversation with us. It's always great. We hear from you guys more and more frequently, and we really like that. We are hopefully getting better depending on the time of school year. You guys know how it works. Depending on the time of school year, we're better or maybe worse at getting back to you in a timely manner. Yeah. But we do love hearing from you guys. Keep sending us questions, keep sending us comments, things like that. Things you'd like us to talk about, things that have actually we've said that are horrendously wrong, and you're like, oh, that's wrong. You shouldn't say that again.
Yeah.
Correct us if we're saying something that's incorrect. We'd love to talk that through more too. But if you found this helpful, like this episode, share it again, leave a review. All those things are helpful. Share this with somebody as the school year starts. Maybe if
good conversation for teams to have.
Absolutely. As I was going to say, as people actually show back up to work this year, not a bad one to have people listen to maybe work through a conversation and figure out what everybody's identity is going to be and what are some of those habits that they want to put in place. But we thank you again, as always, and let's go out there and do the work.
Let's go do it.
Hey, everybody, let's keep the conversation going.
Like and subscribe below and keep the comments rolling.